Good morning everybody, I'm Jill, behind the camera is Roger, and we are which way now? We are in the Roman baths, and this is really interesting. These Roman baths were discovered by the Romans, or by people before the Romans, who knows really, but they were hot springs coming through the ground, and the Romans developed it, and they developed it to the size of about a football stadium. And from about 43 AD, I think the Romans invaded, and for about 300 or 400 years these were very active, very useful spas, and when the Romans left they fell into disrepair. And they weren't rediscovered really until about Victorian times. And yesterday we did a walking tour, and the man was telling us that in Victorian times all of these statues were recarved, so they were recarved in the 1890s, apart from Julius Caesar, who you can see over my shoulder, who apparently about 34 years ago there was a student who decided to go for an evening dip after a drink or two, no doubt, and he took Julius Caesar with him. And Julius Caesar didn't survive, but the student did. We've just been reading about these baths, and the most amazing thing is that there would have been a ceiling on here which would have been roughly the same height as that building to my left, which is quite amazing, 20 metres above the water, and it does say that people would have been amazed when they came in here. The other thing is, if you look down, that's the original level of the Roman street. So Bath has been built, as I said yesterday, about 5 metres higher than that original Roman level, where things have been filled up with mud, various bits and pieces, and that was the original level of the Roman street, and we are considerably higher than that now. These swimming baths, or public baths, were dedicated to Sulis Minerva. The local people, before the Romans came, had adopted this spring and made sacrifices to the god Sul. And when the Romans came, they wanted also to have their god Minerva, who was a god of water and a god of healing. So they decided to name the place Sulis Minerva. It was also known as Aquae Sulis, which was the name of the town. And this is the head of Sulis Minerva. This is an overflow from the spring, and this water actually flows into an original Roman drain and then down into the river, and it's very steamy and very warm just here as well. It's interesting because they were just saying about the fact that when the roof was here, the water was very clear, and that was because actually it's the sunlight that makes it go green with algae. And when the roof was here, of course, no sunlight got in, so the water stayed particularly clear. And it was also interesting when we were doing our walking tour yesterday, the man was saying that it became fashionable in kind of the early 1700s to 1800s to drink the water here. And what people used to have to do, bear in mind the baths weren't restored properly, but what people had to do was actually come down very early in the morning to get their drink, because otherwise the water would have been so scummy where everybody had been bathing, it would have been quite revolting. This is the Great Bath, and we've just been through a series of rooms that were quite dark, and they were very various temperatures. There was a changing room, and then there were two or three other rooms which increased in temperature each time, and basically there were sets of these rooms either end for the men and the ladies. And it was quite interesting. There was also another little swimming pool, and this was kind of the culmination of everything. This was the Great Bath, where people came to socialise and to chat, and we were just wondering, I presume this was mixed, although in the 2nd century apparently Hadrian the emperor decided that mixed bathing was not desirable, so that was why they built these two other sets of rooms either end of the Great Bath. This is about 46 degrees, and apparently 1 million litres of water a day rise and fill these baths. So we talked about the fact that men and women, they believe, were split, but actually it's quite interesting because we've just been talking to one of the guides, and he said there's absolutely no artefacts to support whether they were, whether they weren't, whether the great baths in the middle were mixed, or whether there was different times for different sexes. And as he said, what about children? Did they come into the baths? In which case, were they running around if there were naked people around? You know, it was very much a nobody really knows, I think, is the answer to that. And this is quite interesting. This is the gym here, so this is probably the male end, and they think this was the male end partly because this was a gym, and also because this was colder pools at this end than it were at the other end, and they believe that obviously men are harder and they're more able to take the cold than the women are. So this is one of the extra bits of Bath. This is very, very hot, and you can actually see the bubbles rising here. And we were listening to a bit of the audio guide, and it said that the water in this bath has fallen as rain 10,000 years ago. That just blows my mind. And it's been forced up through the ground, and where it's found a small crack, and this is the penny something fault, I believe, in the ground, and where it's found a small crack in the ground, that's where it comes to the surface, and that's what is under Bath, is that particular fault. So we did say in the 17 and 1800s they used to like to drink this water, so here goes. Oh, it's hot. Not sure about hot water, but actually it could be a lot worse. It doesn't really taste very much different to normal water, except for the fact that it's quite warm. So I'm assuming now I'll be cured of everything. I said that there was a lot of steam rooms and sweat rooms and things like that, and this is a hypercaust, and basically there was a fire that was lit at one end, and then the hot air would basically circulate in amongst all of these pillars, and they could make it as warm or as cold as they like by letting in more air from outside, and that was how they heated those rooms. This is Sydney Gardens in Bath, and apparently it's one of the only original Georgian pleasure gardens in the city that still remains. And it's quite interesting because it actually has the railway running through the middle of it as well, and very well fenced off and everything, but it is quite an interesting place to be, and it's been a lovely cycle through the park as well. We've cycled along the towpath, which is the path that runs alongside of the canal, and we cycled for about 4.5 miles outside of Bath, and we've arrived at the Dundas Aqueduct. And this was completed in 1810, and apparently is one of the masterpieces of that century's engineering, and it was scheduled an ancient monument in 1951 because it's such a magnificent example of an aqueduct. Now, the Romans introduced aqueducts into Britain, but once the canals took off, they really started to make them massively much more popular, because obviously they needed to link canals without going up and down hills, preferably, because locks cost a lot of money. So they started to build more and more aqueducts, and there's two on this short stretch. There's this one, which is the Dundas, and then there's the Avon-Cliff Aqueduct further down as well. And this aqueduct goes over the River Avon and also over the railway. And just as an aside, the River Avon actually means river, because Avon in Roman, or in ancient Roman language, actually means water or river. So this actually means river, and there are 7 River Avons in the UK. Earlier on I said we were walking by or cycling by the towpath, and just a little bit of history of towpaths. Basically, canals were built in the 1800s or the late 1700s, and at the time they were pulled by horses. Canal barges or canal boats were pulled by horses, so the horses obviously needed somewhere to go. So unlike rivers, every canal has a towpath alongside it, which you can cycle on, walk along, and they're also a great place for spotting wildlife, just like the heron behind me. So we are now at the Blackberries campsite, which is in Monkton Farley, not too far from Bath. Compared to the last campsite we went to, it's a very similar price, and I have to say there is no comparison. This is very basic. There was one shower. There's another loo block over there as well, which had a couple of loos in it, and Yeah, it's pretty basic, not particularly clean, I would say either, which is a terrible thing to say, but it's very hard to know, isn't it? Because when we've been here for two nights so far, and it has just poured with rain. This is virtually the only time it's stopped raining the whole time we've been here. So it's bound to be more wet and dirty because everybody traipses in with dirty shoes and that kind of thing. So I don't want to give it a bad review because I think that, you know, I need to come and see it in the summer when it's probably nice weather to give it a fair review. We are on hard standing, but it was pretty squidgy when we all round the van, I think it's fair to say. Most people here are in caravans or motorhomes, so they do need a hard standing, and there's a few of them, but they're not brilliant and they're not huge either. Yeah, mixed reviews for this campsite. It would probably be a very different thing if it was a nice summer day. But compared to the last place, with the price and everything, I would say fairly mixed reviews. So we're going to talk about cycling a little bit, and you can see from my back how bad the weather has been. It has been horrific while we've been here, and the water and the mud are just everywhere. We've still had a great time though, but from here it's about 4.5 miles into Bath, and at the very beginning you have to come out of the campsite, turn left, turn right, and as soon as you turn right, which is less than 1/4 mile, you're on a really, really steep hill, like ridiculously steep. I don't think I've ever been up or down anything on a bike as steep as that. Yesterday we were in fact on the way there and the way back there was a car. It's not really wide enough for a bike and a car even, and on the way back I was being overtaken by, there was a car coming down the hill, I was going up it, and I tried to get past and couldn't, and then had to stop, which was not good, because then I had to start again on a ridiculously steep hill. I did manage to, but it was touch and go, I have to be honest. So much so that today we actually came back a very different way, much further, but much, much nicer.
So yesterday I said about the Sully Lunns Bath bun, and I had to try a Bath bun. Lying in bed last night, and I thought, I'm sure this isn't what a Bath bun actually is. So in the interest of research, we went into Bath again today, and I bought a Bath bun. This is rather different in the fact that it's actually got currants on top, and it's also got sugary bits on top. And this is kind of more what I was expecting a Bath bun to be. So I'm going to have to try it. Definitely what I was more expecting a Bath bun to be. It's a lot sweeter than the Sully Lunns Bath bun, and in my view, I prefer it a lot more.